Prologue. Robert Walton lived at the end of the 18th century and had one great ambition in life: to sail the seas surrounding the North Pole and to discover a passage through them. He traveled to the port of Archangel, in the northeast of Russia, bought a ship, chose a suitable crew, and set off on his voyage. One day, as they were sailing through the ice, they saw a strange sight. A sled, pulled by dogs, was traveling northward. In the sled, guiding the dogs, sat a huge man. They watched him through their telescopes until he was out of sight. The next morning, on a block of ice floating beside their boat, they found a similar sled. On the sled was a man, almost frozen to death, exhausted and very thin. The crew carried him onto the ship and looked after him until he was better. The man's name was Victor Frankenstein, and this is the story he told Robert Walton when he was able to talk. A strange and tragic story told by a dying man on a ship surrounded by ice.
Chapter 1. Victor's Early Years.
Frankenstein sat up and began to talk in a low voice.
My family is a very well-known and respected family in the city of Geneva in Switzerland. My father got married late in life to a woman much younger than himself. She was the daughter of a close friend who had fallen into unfortunate circumstances and whom my father helped until he died. My parents spent a lot of time traveling, and when I was about 5 years old, we were together in Italy. One day, while walking, we passed a poor farm, and on this farm lived a farmer, his wife, and their 5 children. One of the children looked very different from the others. She was not dark and strong like them, but fair-haired and delicate. Her name was Elizabeth. She was the daughter of an Italian nobleman. Her mother had died giving birth, and her father had been killed fighting for his country. The farmer and his wife had agreed to take the child into their family and to look after her. My parents offered to adopt her and bring her up as their own child. So Elizabeth came to live with us. She called my parents uncle and aunt, and she called me cousin. Everyone loved Elizabeth, including myself. She was sweet and gentle, and always had time for me, for the family, and for our friends. 2 years later, my parents had a second son, Ernest, and after him came my youngest brother, William. My parents gave up traveling and we settled in Switzerland. We had a house in Geneva and another in the country, not far from Geneva, where we lived most of the time. We led a very quiet life. I did not mix with the boys of my age, but I did have one very close friend, Henry Clerval. He was the son of a Geneva merchant. He loved excitement and danger, and he read a great deal. He made up stories and tried to make us act them out. I had a happy childhood. I loved learning, but above all I wanted to learn the secrets of heaven and earth, to learn about nature and the soul of man. I read all the books I could on this subject. My father, however, was not interested in science, and so I studied on my own as well as going to school in Geneva. One day, when I was about 15, there was a terrible thunderstorm. The loud bursts of thunder seemed to come from all over the sky. Suddenly, an old oak tree near our house was hit by lightning and exploded in flames. It was my first experience of the destructive power of nature. When I look back on my life, it seems to me that this event was a strong effort by the forces of good to prevent the tragedy ahead of me, but it was unsuccessful. Chapter 2. Victor the Student. When I was 17, my parents decided that I should go to study at the University of Ingolstadt in Germany. But before I left, a very sad event in my life took place. Elizabeth became very ill with scarlet fever and was in danger of dying. My mother nursed her, Elizabeth was saved, but my mother caught the fever. Just before she died, she called Elizabeth and myself to her. "My children," she said, "I always dreamed that one day you would get married. I hope that your father will live to see it happen. Elizabeth, you must take my place and look after the children for me." Some weeks later, I left for Ingolstadt. Henry Clerval tried to persuade his father to let him go with me, but his father refused. He did not want his son to study. He wanted him to be a merchant. The night before I left, we all stayed up late talking. The next morning, everyone was there to say goodbye to me. I promised that I would write often. I felt very sad and also very nervous. I was alone, and I would have to make new friends at the university, which I knew would be difficult for me. But during my long journey, I began to look forward to studying and gaining knowledge. The day after I arrived, I introduced myself to the professor of natural philosophy, Dr. Krempe. He gave me several books to read and told me that I would also study chemistry with another professor, Professor Waldman. I did not like Dr. Krempe, and I decided not to go to his lectures. But I did go to Professor Waldman's lectures, and what he said immediately caught my attention and my interest. From that moment, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to explore unknown paths and to solve the deepest mysteries of creation. I told Professor Waldman that I wanted to become a man of science. He took me to his laboratory and explained to me how to use the various machines there. He gave me a list of books to read, and I left. It was a memorable day for me. It decided my future fate. I spent my days reading books, going to lectures, and getting to know the men of science at the university. I made a real friend in Professor Waldman. I learned very quickly because I worked so hard. 2 years passed like this, and I did not even go home to Geneva. At the end of 2 years, I succeeded in improving some scientific instruments, and the other students and professors admired and respected me. I felt that I had learned as much as I could in Ingolstadt, and I began to think about returning home to Geneva. But then something happened that made me decide to stay longer. Chapter 3. The Discovery. What interested me most was the structure of the human body and what it is that gives us life. I decided to concentrate on these two areas of study. I felt I had to learn about death as well as life, and spent many days and nights studying what happened to a body after death. Suddenly, in the middle of all this darkness, I saw the light. I discovered the secret of life. It was so simple that I was amazed that it had not been discovered before. "What is the secret of life?" interrupted Walton. "Please tell me." "Wait," I said. "I cannot tell you. Listen and you will understand why." I was of course delighted by my discovery. The secret of creation was now within my grasp, but I hesitated for a long time, wondering how I should use it. I had the power to give life to a body, but how was I going to make this body with its muscles and veins and so on? This would be unbelievably difficult, but I had no doubt that in the end I would succeed. So, I began to work on the creation of a human being. I imagined it would be difficult to work with small pieces, so I decided to make the creature gigantic, about 7.5 feet tall. I spent several months collecting the materials that I needed, and then I set to work. It is hard to describe the feelings that I had at that time. I was full of enthusiasm. I wanted to create many good, happy creatures who would thank me for giving them life. How naive and innocent I was. I failed many times, but I never gave up. I worked all day and I often worked all night. My workshop was a single room at the top of the house where I was staying. Using the bones of dead bodies that I had collected from various places, I tried to recreate the human form. There was a beautiful summer that year, but I did not see it. I forgot about my family and friends. I received letters from my father, but he never once criticized me for not writing. He simply asked what I was doing. I knew deep down inside that he would not approve of my work, but it did not stop me. Another 18 months passed, and I had nearly finished my work. I was excited, but I was also anxious. Every night I had bad dreams, and I became very nervous. Only my energy for my work kept me going. Chapter 4. The Creation of a Monster. Then the moment arrived. It was 1 o'clock on a cold, wet November night when the storm began. Black clouds filled the sky, thunder crashed, and then, finally, came the lightning. My candle had nearly burned out when the sky lit up and there was a noise as if hell itself had opened. For a few seconds, nothing. Then I saw the dull yellow eye of my creature open. It breathed hard and its entire body trembled. He had shiny, long black hair, good features, and perfect white teeth. But suddenly I noticed that the muscles and arteries of his body could be seen through his thin yellow skin. He had watery, colorless eyes, and his lips, instead of being pink and healthy, remained thin, cracked, and black. It was a catastrophe. I had worked so hard to create a beautiful creature, and I had failed. What had I done? My beautiful dream disappeared, and I was filled with horror and disgust. I could not look at the being I had created, and I ran out of the room and into my bedroom. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of Elizabeth. I dreamed she was walking through Ingolstadt. Surprised and delighted, I kissed her, but as I did, she fell down dead. Her features changed, and I was looking at my dead mother. I woke up suddenly, sweating terribly and shaking in terror. Then I saw the monster, holding back the curtain of my bed. He was staring at me and smiling strangely. He stretched his hand out toward me as if he wanted to touch me, but I screamed in terror and leaped out of bed. I ran straight down the stairs and out of the house. I spent the rest of the night outside in the courtyard in terrible fear. I was very weak and filled with horror. I was also bitterly disappointed. I had dreamed of creating a being full of goodness and beauty, but I had failed completely. The morning finally came, gray and wet. At 6 o'clock I went out into the street and walked around, soaked by the rain. I did not dare to return to my room. Eventually I stopped at the inn and noticed a coach arriving. Henry Clerval got out of the coach and walked toward me. "My dear friend," he exclaimed, "how happy I am to see you! How lucky that you should be standing here just as I arrive." I was delighted to see Clerval. Seeing him made me think of my father, Elizabeth, and home. In a moment, I forgot my horror and misfortune. For the first time in months, I felt calm and happy. I welcomed him warmly, and we went together to my room. Chapter 5. Clerval's Visit. On the way to my college, Henry told me why he was in Ingolstadt. "It was very difficult for me to persuade my father to let me come here to study," he said, "but I finally succeeded. Oh, Victor, I can't tell you how happy I am to be here." "How are my father and brothers and Elizabeth?" I asked. "And Justine?" Justine was the sweet local girl who had come to help my mother look after the house and the children, and who still worked for us. "They are all very well," Henry replied, "although they are worried because you have not written for so long. I intend to talk to you about that later. But, my dear Victor, you look so ill. What is the matter?" "I have been working very, very hard on something, but I am finished now." I trembled as I spoke. We arrived at my college. I suddenly thought that the monster might still be in my room, alive and walking about. The thought terrified me. But I was even more terrified that Henry might see it, so I asked him to wait at the bottom of the stairs and ran up to my room. I paused with my hand on the door handle, and a cold shiver ran through me. I pushed the door open and went slowly into the room, trembling with fear. The room was empty. The monster had gone. I could hardly believe my good luck. I clapped my hands for joy and ran back down to Clerval. We went up to my room and the servant brought us breakfast. I was so happy that I could not sit still, and I jumped about the room laughing wildly. Henry looked at me and said, "My dear Victor, do not laugh like that. How ill you are! What is the cause of all this?" "Do not ask me," I cried. I put my hands over my eyes. I could see the monster standing in front of me. "He can tell you. Oh, save me, save me!" I imagined that the monster seized me. I struggled furiously and fell to the floor unconscious. I was very ill for several months, and during that time Henry was my nurse. He knew that my father was too old to travel, and that Elizabeth would be very upset to see me so ill, so he did not tell them. I thought I saw the monster constantly and raved about him all the time. Henry must have thought I was mad, but he nursed me day and night. Without him, I would probably have died. I got better slowly and began to feel like my old self again. "Dear friend," I said to Henry one day, "you have looked after me for months instead of studying as you wished. How can I ever thank you?" "You can thank me by getting well as fast as you can," replied Henry, "and as you seem to be in such good spirits, perhaps I can speak to you about a certain subject." I began to tremble. Did he want to talk about the monster? "You should write to your father and Elizabeth. They do not know how ill you have been, and they are worried by your long silence." I told him that I would write to them, and he gave me a letter which had arrived from Elizabeth. Chapter 6. Dreadful News. Elizabeth wrote about my family's concern for my health, and their joy that I was at last getting better. They were waiting eagerly for me to come home and see them. My father was well. My brother Ernest was waiting to go into the army. Justine, the young girl from the village, still came to help at the house, and William, my youngest brother, had grown in my absence into a fine little boy, tall for his age. I immediately wrote back, though the effort tired me very much. 2 weeks later, I was finally strong enough to leave my room. I introduced Clerval to all the university people I knew and helped him to begin his studies. I was supposed to return to Geneva at the end of autumn, but my departure was delayed. Then it became impossible to travel because of the snow, so my journey to Geneva was put off until the following spring. I was very disappointed at having to wait so long to see my family. When spring finally arrived, I was very excited at the thought of going home. A letter arrived from my father. I opened it quickly, happy to have news from home. But when I had finished reading the letter, I threw it down on the table, covered my face with my hands, and burst into tears. "Frankenstein!" exclaimed Henry. "What has happened to make you so unhappy?" I gave him the letter to read. My father had told me some terrible news to prepare me for a very sad homecoming. My little brother, William, had been murdered. My father, brothers, and Elizabeth had gone for a walk. It was getting dark when they started to think of returning home, but they could not find Ernest and William, who had run ahead. Ernest eventually returned and told them that they had been playing hide and seek, and that William had gone off to hide. Ernest had tried to find him but could not. He waited a long time for William to return, but he did not come back. My father, Ernest, and Elizabeth spent the whole night looking for him. At 5 o'clock in the morning, they found William lying dead in some grass. The murderer's fingerprints were on his neck. He had been wearing a gold chain with a picture of his mother, and it had disappeared. My father begged me to come home as quickly as possible to be with them and comfort them all. Clerval came with me to order the horses, and I was soon on my way. When I got to Geneva, it was completely dark, and the gates of the town were already closed. so I had to pass the night in a nearby village. I could not sleep, and so decided to go and find the place where William had been murdered. While I was walking, a storm began, and in a sudden flash of lightning, I saw a figure standing beside some trees close by. It was a huge, ugly figure. I recognized him immediately. It was the monster. The horrible truth dawned on me at once. The monster which I created had murdered my brother. I began to tremble so violently that I had to lean against a tree for support. The figure passed me quickly and vanished in the darkness. It was 5 o'clock in the morning when I entered my father's house, 6 years after leaving for Ingolstadt. I told the servants not to disturb the family and went into the library to wait for them to wake up. My brother, Ernest, was the first to appear, and tears began to pour down his face when he saw me. I tried to calm him and asked how my father and Elizabeth were. Elizabeth blames herself for William's death, he told me, and she is suffering terribly. But since the murderer has been discovered— "What?" I exclaimed. "That is impossible. I saw him. He was free last night." "I do not know what you mean," replied Ernest. "But now that we know who the murderer is, we are suffering even more. No one believed it at first, and even now Elizabeth refuses to believe that it is true, despite the evidence. Who would have thought that our sweet, loving Justine could commit such a terrible crime?" I could not believe my ears. Justine Moritz a murderer? But my brother told me the evidence against her. On the morning that my brother's murder was discovered, Justine had fallen ill and had to stay in bed for several days. During this time, one of the servants examined the clothes Justine had been wearing on the night of the murder and found the gold chain and picture that William had been wearing in her pocket. The servant immediately went to the police, and Justine was arrested. Just as Ernest finished, my father came into the room. He looked ill and unhappy, but tried to give me a warm welcome. I told him I was sure that Justine could not have done such a terrible thing. I could see that he also did not believe that Justine was guilty of murder. "The trial is today," he said. "Let us hope she will be set free." Elizabeth entered the room. She was even more beautiful now, but her face was covered in sadness. She welcomed me with great affection. "My dear cousin," she said, "your arrival fills me with hope. Perhaps you will find some way of proving that Justine is innocent. I cannot bear to think that she is guilty." "Do not worry, my dear Elizabeth," I said. "It will be proved that she is innocent. There is nothing to fear." Chapter 7. The Trial. The trial began at 11 o'clock in the morning. As I sat in court waiting for it to start, I was in a terrible state. I could not bear to think that the monster I created might cause Justine's death as he had my brother's. When Justine came into court, she appeared quite calm. She was dressed as if for a funeral and looked very serious, but beautiful. She looked over to where we were sitting and smiled at us sadly but affectionately. At first, many witnesses were called. Several strange facts worked against Justine to prove that she was guilty. She had been out the whole night on which the murder had been committed. The next morning she was seen by a woman not far from the place where William had been found. The woman asked her what she was doing there, but Justine gave a very confused answer. She returned to the house at 8 o'clock and said that she had spent the night looking for William. She asked if he was safe, and when she was shown the body she became hysterical and had to stay in bed for several days. Then the picture and chain found in Justine's pocket were produced. Elizabeth was asked if the chain was the one that William had been wearing, and when she said that it was, the people in court shouted out in horror and anger. Justine was called to defend herself. Through her tears she told them what she remembered. She had spent the evening at an aunt's house in a village not far from Geneva. As she was returning home about 9 o'clock, she met a man who asked her if she had seen the lost boy. She was alarmed by the news and spent the next few hours looking for him. By then, the gates of Geneva were shut, and so she spent the night in a barn. When she woke up the next morning, she found William's gold chain and the picture lying next to her in the straw. She had no idea how it came to be there. Elizabeth then spoke of Justine's good character, and told the court that she had known Justine for many years and could not believe that she had committed such a terrible crime. But it did no good. I could see from the faces of the judges and the people in the court that they had already decided that Justine was guilty. The next morning I returned to court and spoke to one of the officers. He told me that the judges had voted and Justine had been found guilty. She had even confessed and was to be put to death the next day. Justine asked to see Elizabeth, and I went with her. We went into the prison and saw Justine sitting on some straw. Her hands were chained together and she was crying. When she saw Elizabeth, she cried even more and said, "Please do not believe that I am guilty. I only confess so that God would forgive me and not send me to hell, and now I am a liar." "Do not worry," said Elizabeth. "I believe you, and I will go and tell the judges what you have just told me. I am sure they will believe me." But the judges refused to listen to Elizabeth, and the next day Justine was hanged. How I suffered! 2 innocent people had died because of me. My once happy home was a sad place now. I was full of despair and guilt. I could not sleep, and I could not bear to be with other people. My father was worried by the change in me and tried to help me, but I did not want to be helped. We decided to leave Geneva and go to our house in the country in Bellerive. But there was to be no happiness there either. My father's health had been affected by the horror of the recent events, and Elizabeth was sad and despairing. Often, after the rest of the family had gone to bed, I took the boat and spent many hours on the lake, but I could not find peace. Every day I feared that the monster that I had created might commit a new crime. I finally decided that a trip to the mountains might help me to forget these terrible feelings. And so 2 months after Justine's death, I set off for Chamonix and Mont Blanc. Chapter 8. A Meeting. I spent the next day in the mountains and valleys, and by evening I felt much calmer, and my thoughts were happier. But the following day when I woke up, it was raining very heavily, and a mist covered the mountains, and once again I felt depressed and miserable. In spite of the rain, I decided to climb to the top of the Montanvert glacier. The climb up was steep, but there was a good path, and I often stopped to admire the view. It took me several hours to reach the glacier. The sun was shining when I arrived, and the beauty of the scenery filled me with happiness once again. Suddenly, I saw a man in the distance coming toward me with superhuman speed. He jumped effortlessly over the rocks and cracks in the ice that I had crossed with great caution. As he came nearer, I could see that he was much taller and bigger than a normal man. It was the monster, my creation. I trembled in fear and anger, but I decided that I would stand my ground and wait for him to approach. Then I would take away the life that I had so foolishly given him. "Murderer!" I screamed. "I'll kill you for what you've done." But what happened next was so completely unexpected that it stopped my fury, and I stood, silent, incapable of movement or speech. The monster raised his hand and began to speak. This thing I had created had reason and was capable of speech. "I expected these words from you," he said quite clearly and calmly. "Everyone hates ugly, miserable creatures like me. You created me, but you hate me. You even intend to kill me. But I ask you to do your duty toward me, and if you agree to my conditions, I will leave you and yours in peace. However, if you refuse, I will kill you all." Furious, I jumped on him, but he was much too strong for me. "Be calm," he said. "You are my master, and I do not wish to harm you. Believe me, I want to be good and kind to people, but you made an ugly creature who people hate and fear. I am forced to live a miserable and lonely existence in the mountains and glaciers, and I have learned to hate because of my experiences with others. You are the only person with the power to change all this, and if you do, you can be sure that your family and friends will be safe. You have no choice but to listen to me." He turned, and I followed him across the ice to the hut where he lived. Chapter 9. The Monster's Story. It was cold, and it had started to rain again. I sat down beside the fire, and the creature began his story.
"I remember my creation, and I remember leaving your room. I went into the forest in Ingolstadt, and I began to feel very hungry and thirsty. I ate some berries and drank some water from a stream, and then I lay down to sleep because I was very tired. When I woke up, it was dark, and I felt frightened and cold because I did not have enough clothes. I felt so miserable and lonely that I wept. Soon it became light, and I went to look for some berries to eat. I found a huge cloak under a tree and covered myself with it. Several days passed. I got to know all the things around me in the forest. I was often cold, but one day I discovered a fire that had been left burning. I was pleased with the warmth, but when I touched the flames, I burned my hand. I thought it was strange that the same thing could give both pleasure and pain. It was becoming more and more difficult to find food, so I decided to start walking and find a new place. After 3 days of walking, I left the forest and found myself in the open country. It was early in the morning, and I longed to find food and shelter. At last I saw a small hut. The door was open, so I went in. An old man was sitting near the fire, preparing his breakfast. When he saw me, he screamed loudly and ran out of the hut. I was surprised and confused by this, but the food attracted me, and I had yet to learn that I must become accustomed to this reaction. I ate his breakfast, lay down on some straw, and fell asleep. When I awoke, I continued on my way, and in the evening I arrived at a village. I was fascinated by the huts, houses, and gardens, and by all the food and vegetables I saw. But the village people screamed when they saw me and tried to attack me. I escaped to the open country and spent the night in a wooden hut behind a little cottage. The next morning I covered most of the holes in the walls with stones and wood so that I would be warm, and put clean straw on the floor. I decided that I would live there until I found something better. I discovered that I could see into the cottage through a hole in the wall. Through this hole I could see a small, clean room with very simple furniture. An old man was sitting, and a beautiful young girl was cleaning the room. Soon a young man arrived at the cottage, carrying a load of wood. The girl greeted him, and they both carried on with their work before sitting down with the old man to eat a meal together. It grew dark, and I was surprised to see that the people in the cottage used candles to have light in the cottage. The young man read to the family for a while, and then they all went to bed. I lay on my straw but could not sleep. I could not stop thinking about the people in the cottage and the gentle way they behaved with one another. I longed to join them, but I remembered what had happened in the village. I watched the family in the cottage for several days and discovered several things about them. The young man worked outside all day, while the young girl worked inside the cottage. They showed much kindness and affection toward the old man, which impressed me very much. I stopped taking their food for myself, and I went out in the middle of the night to collect wood for their fire. I wanted to help them. But the biggest discovery that I made about these people was that they could communicate with each other by making sounds, by talking. I wanted to be able to talk too, but it took me several months to learn and understand words like fire, milk, bread, and wood. I spent the whole winter in this way. I was happy when my cottagers were happy, and sad when they were sad. I longed to become friends with them, but I decided to wait until I had mastered their language. If I could speak to them, it might make up for being so terribly ugly. I knew by now how terrible I looked. When I saw my reflection in the water and compared it to the delicate faces of the people in the cottage, I had no doubt about my frightening appearance. Spring came, and I wanted more and more to become friends with the family in the cottage. I worked hard at improving my speaking till I could say simple words quite well. One day, a beautiful lady whom I had never seen before arrived and asked for the young man. He was overjoyed to see her and kissed her hand. The young man called her his sweet Arab, and I soon realized that the lady did not understand the language that they spoke in the cottage. I took advantage of her lessons to learn more words myself and also to learn how to read. The summer passed in this way. I not only learned how to read and talk, but I also learned about human society. And slowly I learned the story of my friends in the cottage. The old man's name was de Lacy. The young man, his son, was called Felix. The young woman, his daughter, was called Agatha. The Arabian lady's name was Safi. De Lacy had once lived a life of luxury in Paris, and was liked and respected by everyone who knew him. Felix fell in love with Safi without even being able to speak to her. Safi's father, a wealthy Turkish merchant, did not approve of Felix and refused to let Safi marry him. Safi's father used his money and influence to cause a scandal for the de Lacy family. All three were arrested by the police and imprisoned for 5 months. As a result of this, they lost all their wealth and were forced to leave France forever. They came to live in the cottage in Germany, where I discovered them. Safi, however, did not forget Felix. She found out where he was living, took her jewels and a sum of money, and set off for Germany. After great difficulties, she finally arrived at the cottage and was reunited with Felix. That is the story of my cottagers, and that is how I came to know that men can do evil to each other as well as good. Autumn and winter passed, and I wanted very much to make myself known to the people in the cottage. I spent my days planning how I could introduce myself, and finally decided that I would enter the cottage one day when the old man was alone. He was nearly blind, and would not be horrified by my appearance. If I could win his friendship, it might help me win the friendship of his children.